Hello, my name's Marion Rose, and I'm so delighted to introduce Aletha Solter, Ph.D., again for another conversation. So welcome, Aletha.
Thank you.
And yay, I'm so glad. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the crying in arms approach, which you talk about in Beware Baby, one of your books.
Yes.
So particularly for people who are really unfamiliar with this approach, because I think often in the wider culture it's seen that really we only have two options around babies and crying, that we either perceive all crying to indicate an immediate need, and of course if that's the way we're understanding it, of course then we would do everything we could to stop all crying.
Yeah.
And on the other approach, the idea that babies need to learn to self-soothe or self-settle, or to help them sleep by leaving them alone to cry in various forms. But your approach really talks about this a very different way from both of these approaches, which is the crying in arms approach. So I wonder if you'd like to share what is the crying in arms approach?
Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. The idea is that babies sometimes just need to cry. And there's no immediate need other than the need to be held and listened to and empathized with. And that's because babies have stress. I mean, maybe they had a traumatic birth or prenatal experience, or there's just overstimulation. Big family came to visit to see the new baby, and that's overstimulating. Too many people, too many, just too much.
Yeah.
So babies release that. They can release that through crying, just like we adults can. We can release stress with a good cry. And anyone who's ever cried in the arms of someone who loves them knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
People who aren't lucky enough to have had that experience, it's more difficult to understand what it's like to just cry and just a shoulder to cry on, while you're being held and loved and listened to, without anybody trying to jiggle you or put something in your mouth or distract you. I mean, just being there for you, giving you that space, that emotional space, that emotional safety to feel emotion. So that's what babies need from birth.
Yeah.
And so crying in arms. I don't recommend leaving babies alone to cry, and I don't recommend trying to always stop them from crying. Those are the two extremes you mentioned, and most parenting books give one or both of those options. Yeah. And this is the third way. It's the third way of responding to a baby's real needs, and just recognizing stress relieves crying. So holding, loving, making eye contact, just holding that little child, and it's a deep connection. It really is a deep connection.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love how you talk about it as really meeting, that is meeting their needs, because I think often, I'm sure you've heard many times that parents will come there, well, I'm doing everything I can, but still they're crying, or they're feeding every half an hour, or, what can I do? But to really understand that this need to express feelings, and that babies have real feelings just as we do. They feel things really intensely, and they need to be heard with love and with compassion, presence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know and of course, if a parent's coming new to this, there's often, I'm sure you do too, is parents wanting some reassurance, because they want to make sure that this isn't going to be harmful for their baby. Right. And I know often people will want some reassurance, research reassurance, or hearing from other parents the experiences they've had, or hearing from you, why you're confident that this really is really beneficial for babies. So would you talk a little bit about that, about the research and about reassurance for parents?
Yeah, well, there is research on crying. There's biochemical analysis of tears, and the research found that there are a higher concentration of stress hormones in emotional tears than irritant tears caused by onions, or the kinds of things that make our
Yes.
our eyes tear up.
Yes.
Onions can do that, and so can emotions. Well, the emotions do have higher concentrations of stress hormones, so that the theory is that this is probably one way that our body is getting rid of these stress hormones. Okay. There's more recent research showing that crying it's actually the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, and that counteracts the sympathetic nervous system, which comes into play during the stress response. So parasympathetic is healing, getting back to homeostasis. So there's evidence that it's beneficial psychologically, physically. There's some area of confusion, and almost every lecture I do, I've done lectures on why babies cry in many countries, and one of the questions afterwards is always seems to be about research. People have heard there's research. Oh, doesn't increase the amount of cortisol in the brain? And doesn't that damage the brain? They've seen some kind of research about this. Well, the answer is no. There is absolutely no research. I've never heard of any study showing that crying causes increase in cortisol or damage the brain. What the studies have found, and this is, I think, where the confusion comes in, what the studies have found is that separation from the mother causes an increase in cortisol. And often babies are crying when they're separated, for crying alone. Yes, but it's the separation and not the crying itself. Babies who separate from their mothers have an increase in cortisol levels, whether they're crying or not. Okay, so it's nothing to do with the crying. When babies are in their mother's arms or their father's arms, fathers can do this.
Yes, and that's the wonderful thing about it too, isn't it? That they can do it just as much as mums.
Then there's connection. There's the hormones of connection, oxytocin. I mean, all these wonderful, hormones that counteract the stress response. So
it's a really such a different thing, isn't it, from controlled crying or cry out, because this is all about a baby being right there, right here in our arms, us being present in our bodies, and as you say, that's a completely different thing from the cortisol that comes through separation.
It's completely different, and crying alone gives the message to babies that they're alone, they're abandoned, and that nobody wants to be with them when they're sad, and they're getting messages we don't want to be giving them. And I don't want anyone to feel guilty, though, if they've done this. I did it myself. I'm ashamed to say, with my first child, my son, and I did try the controlled crying approach, and I feel really bad about that. But he turned out okay. We repaired that. I switched to crying in arms. I never, after that, those few nights when I tried that, I stopped doing it, and he's fine. Okay.
Yes, he healed from that, and I love that about your approach and the aware parenting approach, is that it's really possible to repair the things that we may have done unwittingly when we didn't know as much as we know now. We can help our children repair and heal from those.
So that's the crying in arms approach. I encourage parents to think of their child as a teenager saying, I've had a really hard day. I need to cry. Will you hold me?
Yes.
So that's the kind of relationship we're building with. We want to be building with our children, and we can start at birth. Really acknowledging the baby's emotions, listening to emotions, recognizing stress release crying. And it gets confusing when when the baby's hungry. What if the baby needs this? What if the baby needs that? Well, there's all sorts of guidelines in my books for really trying to figure out what kind of crying is going on. But when the needs are met, then we can just offer loving comfort, not comforting to repress,
Yeah.
Comforting and allowing, I think of it. It's a different kind of comforting.
Yeah.
Love,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and what I really want to also just to mention to really what I love about in your work and in the Aware Baby is you're really talking about that first piece, because of course until we pick a crying baby up and hold them, we don't know that crying may be a need to be held, and when we hold them, that might be it. So of course that always needs to be the first thing to check for immediate needs, isn't it? So I love, to talking to the people who might be concerned, how do we know? The other thing I'd love to say is I so appreciate the Aware Baby. I read it, I think, about 12 times because I really wanted to get all the pieces in, and how clearly you do give such clear guidelines about, for example, how to differentiate between hunger and a need to express and release painful feelings. And you do that so clearly. And there's that really that chart that you give, which is so clear and concise. So such
yeah. Well, I learned from my own babies. That, yeah. But I remember with my second child, my daughter, and I was sure I knew how to do it. And then there'd be times she'd cry, and I would say, "I don't know what she needs. I'm supposed to be the expert on this. I don't know. I don't know." But a few mistakes really aren't going to damage a child.
Yeah. Because sometimes we're going to misunderstand the need or the feeling, but there's enough there that we can repair. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we can't possibly meet every baby's need accurately 100% of the time, but that's okay. The baby gets the big picture. The baby will know that they're loved. Babies know that as long as we get that across, they'll be fine.
Yeah. And I want to say one more thing, because I know we're about to finish, but what I also love about your approach is that it does become a thing for each parent to almost play with, just as you did, and just as I did, to play, well, what happens when I do this? And the really, not only the research that's there, but our own research as parents to see, I remember that experience I had so many times of, if I was trying to do things to distract them, and then instead when I just really held them, I was present, and I said, right here, I'm listening, and they'd come out the other side of this big cry, and they would be so present and make eye contact and mold into my body and be so relaxed, their muscles, and sleep peacefully, and all those concentrate, all those things that are so tangible. So it's such a wonderful thing that parents can do that. They have all the information in the Aware Baby, and they can go and see for themselves, try it out and play with it for themselves.
Yeah, I tell parents, I encourage them, experiment. Try different things. You're not going to damage your child. You this is like a little. Your child is your research subject. This is it's experimental. Parenting is experimental because we haven't done it before. I mean, every generation has to learn anew. How to do this thing called parenting.
And as the experimenters, we need to just keep observing, don't we? And that's both of our backgrounds, which I think is why we both love it, is keep observing your baby. How are they before? How are they after? How are they if you do this? And really letting that information really guide.
Yeah, observation. That's the key. Yeah, you did this. What happened?
Yes.
You cut something else.
That happened. And then there's always a new day, isn't there? I always would tell that to myself. Okay, so there's another day starting. What am I going to take from what I observed and what I did, and see if I can tweak it? And
but it does get complicated because babies grow and change, and
exactly all the time.
New needs. So what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. But anyway, that's the way it is.
Back to the drawing board again, isn't it? Yeah. Which again, then you have your other books, you have Tears and Tantrums, you have all your gamut, if that's the accurate word, of books for people to go back and learn more. So just one last thing I'd love to hear. So if someone's new to the Crying Arms approach, maybe they're just about to start, or they maybe have just started listening to their baby's feelings. Do you have a word of, or a sentence of wisdom that you'd like to share with them?
Words of wisdom. Hang in there. Don't give up. Get support. Maybe if you're just starting, find someone to sit with you and just while you're paying attention to your baby, maybe you could have a friend to pay attention to you and check in with you. How you doing? start with 5 minutes. If it's too hard, don't do it. Just, every little bit, you'll learn more about your baby. You'll learn more about yourself. You don't have to rush into this. It's a process. Yeah.
I love that. It's really, isn't it, listening, the parents listening to themselves as well. If it feels too much, stop. And the other thing, the piece I wanted to add to that was, people often say, but I couldn't listen to all, so I just listened to 5 minutes. And they say, but does that cancel it all out? And I always love to say, no, every feeling that you listen to of your baby, that makes a difference to them. They've expressed that, they've released it, they've had that heard, and that any listening makes a difference to them.
Any listening does, yeah. It's not gonna, if you stop your baby prematurely and say, I can't handle this, but here, you take him or whatever. It's fine. You still helped your baby from that listening. You were able to do it that day.
Yes, and I would love to I think it's actually probably much preferable, isn't it, if we're feeling worried or concerned or stressed, or maybe they're hungry, or maybe there's a need here, it's probably actually going to be much more helpful. I tend to think that we actually let them know, and we do stop them if we can, rather than listening and having all this fear and anxiety in our bodies that they're going to be then picking up.
Yeah, if we're not really present, they're going to know it anyway. If we're not really present with them, it's not going to feel right.
Well, thank you so much. So you have your book, The Aware Baby, and all the other books, and they're all on your website, www.awareparenting.com. That's the Aware Parenting Institute. Thank you so much. I so enjoyed hearing from you, talking with you, and I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Aletha.